The fluorescent lights of Boston General's emergency ward buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across my tired face as I rushed between patient rooms. My sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum floor, the sound echoing through the nearly empty corridor. It was past midnight, and the hospital had that eerie quiet that only came during the graveyard shift, broken occasionally by the distant beeping of machines and muffled conversations from the nurse's station. My scrubs felt heavy against my skin, damp with perspiration from the endless stream of patients we'd seen tonight. A multi-car accident on the interstate had brought in 7 people, keeping our small night crew running for hours. My feet ached in my worn-out shoes, the same pair I'd been wearing for 2 years because buying new ones meant sacrificing something else from our already tight budget. I pulled my dark hair back into a messy bun, securing it with a hair tie around my wrist. Strands escaped anyway, framing my face as I bent over the computer terminal to update patient charts. The blue light from the monitor made my olive skin look pale and washed out, highlighting the dark circles under my brown eyes that seemed to be permanent fixtures these days. "Elena, can you check on the new admission in room 12? Called Sarah, the head nurse, her voice carrying the exhaustion we all felt. "Just came in about 20 minutes ago. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, stable but unconscious." I nodded, grabbing a clipboard and pen from the counter. Room 12 was at the end of the hall, where we kept the more serious cases that needed constant monitoring. As I walked down the dimly lit corridor, I could hear the steady rhythm of the heart monitor growing louder with each step. The fluorescent light above room 12 flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows across the doorframe. I paused outside, taking a deep breath before entering. Gunshot wounds weren't uncommon in this part of Boston, but they never got easier to see. Each one represented someone's son, brother, father, someone whose family was probably pacing in a waiting room somewhere, wondering if their loved one would make it through the night. I pushed open the door slowly, my eyes adjusting to the softer lighting inside the room. The patient lay still on the white hospital bed, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that the monitors confirmed was strong and regular. He appeared to be in his mid to late 30s, with dark hair that was slightly mussed and olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean heritage. Even unconscious, there was something commanding about his presence, something that made me pause at the foot of his bed. His shoulder was bandaged professionally. The paramedics had done good work stabilizing him. The bullet had gone clean through, missing major arteries and organs. He was lucky, though luck seemed like an odd word to use for someone who'd been shot. His suit jacket had been cut away and bagged as evidence, but I could see the expensive fabric and tailor cut even in its damaged state. I checked his vitals, noting that everything looked good on his chart. Heart rate steady, blood pressure within normal range, oxygen levels perfect. The anesthesia was wearing off gradually, exactly as it should be. Dr. Morrison had done excellent work repairing the damage, and barring any complications, this man would make a full recovery. As I moved closer to adjust his foreline, I noticed his hands resting on top of the white blanket. They were large, strong-looking, with calluses that suggested he wasn't afraid of physical work despite the expensive clothing. But it was the tan line on his right ring finger that caught my attention, the pale stripe of skin that indicated he usually wore a ring but wasn't wearing one now. I'd seen that mark before on my own father's hand after my mother had thrown his wedding ring at him during their final fight. The memory stung, bringing back the familiar ache of abandonment that I'd spent years trying to heal. Some men wore rings, some didn't, but that tan line told a story of something lost or deliberately removed. Shaking off the unwanted memory, I focused on my job. I checked the bandage on his shoulder, looking for any signs of bleeding or infection. The gauze was clean and properly secured. His breathing remained steady and deep, the kind of sleep that came with powerful pain medication and the body's natural healing response. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the heart monitor and the gentle hiss of the oxygen machine. Outside the window, I could see the lights of Boston twinkling in the distance, the city never truly sleeping even at this late hour. Somewhere out there, my 6-year-old daughter Sophia was asleep in her small bed in our cramped apartment, hopefully not having another nightmare about the monsters she'd been dreaming about lately. I made a note on his chart about the vitals check and turned to leave, but something caught my eye. On the small rolling table beside his bed sat a plastic bag containing his personal effects, wallet, keys, and what looked like a cell phone that had been damaged in whatever altercation had led to his injury. But there was something else, something that made me freeze in place. Partially hidden beneath the damaged phone was a small velvet box, the kind used for jewelry. It was deep burgundy, expensive looking, with gold trim around the edges. The kind of box that held something precious, something important. Without thinking, I moved closer, my curiosity getting the better of my professional boundaries. The box was slightly open, revealing a glimpse of something that sparkled under the hospital's harsh lighting. I knew I shouldn't look, knew that patient belongings were supposed to remain untouched except by authorized personnel, but something about that box called to me. Maybe it was the way the light caught whatever was inside, or maybe it was the exhaustion making me act without thinking clearly. I glanced toward the door, confirming that the hallway was empty and no one was coming. The patient remained deeply unconscious, his breathing unchanged. Carefully, I opened the small box just enough to see what was inside. My breath caught in my throat. Nestled in cream-colored satin was the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. It was clearly antique with an intricate design that spoke of old-world craftsmanship. The band was rose gold, delicately carved with tiny flowers and vines that seemed to dance around the circumference. But it was the center stone that truly took my breath away, not a diamond, but what looked like a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught and reflected the light like tiny stars. The ring was feminine, delicate, nothing like the heavy gold bands or flashy jewelry I'd seen on other patients who came through the EA. This was something special, something with history and meaning. The kind of ring that was passed down through generations, carrying with it stories of love and loss and family traditions. I found myself reaching toward it before I caught myself. This belonged to someone, possibly the unconscious man in the bed, possibly someone he cared about. But as I stared at it, a memory surfaced from earlier that evening, something that had been nagging at the back of my mind since my shift started. The lost and found box. Every hospital had one, a collection of items left behind by patients or visitors over the months and years. Jewelry, watches, books, small personal items that somehow got separated from their owners in the chaos of medical emergencies. Our lost and found was kept in a storage closet near the nurse's station, and items that went unclaimed for more than a year were eventually donated to charity. Earlier tonight, during my dinner break, I'd been asked to go through the old items and sort them for donation. Most of it had been unremarkable, reading glasses, cheap watches, paperback novels. But there had been one item that stood out, something that had made me pause and examine it more closely. A ring, not exactly like this one, but similar in its antique quality and obvious value. It had been sitting in that box for over 18 months according to the tag, with no one ever coming to claim it. The ring in my scrub's pocket right now. The one I'd impulsively slipped onto my finger during my break because it fit perfectly and I'd always dreamed of wearing something so beautiful. My hand moved unconsciously to my right ring finger, where the lost and found ring still sat. I'd meant to put it back before my shift ended, but the emergency cases had kept me busy and I'd completely forgotten about it. Now, looking at the similar ring in this patient's belongings, I felt a chill run down my spine. Could they be related somehow? The styles were remarkably similar, both antique, both featuring intricate rose gold work, both obviously expensive and well cared for. But that was impossible, wasn't it? What were the odds that two such similar rings would end up in the same hospital, separated by 18 months in completely different circumstances? I closed the velvet box carefully and stepped back from the bed, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't quite understand. The ring on my finger suddenly felt heavy, like it was burning against my skin. I twisted it nervously, the metal warm from my body heat. The patient stirred slightly, his head turning on the pillow as if he was beginning to surface from the anesthetic-induced sleep. I quickly made a final note on his chart and headed for the door, but not before taking one last look at the man in the bed. Even unconscious and injured, there was something about him that commanded attention. His features were sharp and well-defined, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that spoke of determination and strength. But it was more than just his physical appearance that made me pause. There was an aura about him, something that suggested power and danger in equal measure. His expensive clothes, the way even the paramedics had seemed slightly nervous when they brought him in, the fact that no family or friends had shown up despite him being here for over an hour, it all pointed to someone who lived in a world very different from mine. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. The ring on my finger seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, and I found myself twisting it again as I walked back toward the nurse's station. How's our gunshot wound? Sarah asked without looking up from the computer where she was entering patient data. Stable, I replied, my voice sounding normal despite the turmoil in my mind. Vitals are good, bandage is clean. Dr. Morrison did excellent work. Any idea who he is? No ID came in with him, and no one's called asking about missing persons matching his description. I shook my head, filing his chart in the appropriate slot. The police will probably be by in the morning to ask questions when he wakes up. Sarah nodded absently, already moving on to the next patient concern. But I remained standing there, staring at the closed door of room 12 and fighting the urge to go back inside. The ring on my finger caught the fluorescent light, sending tiny sparkles across my vision like a reminder of something I was supposed to remember but couldn't quite grasp. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and medication rounds. I checked on other patients, updated charts, and assisted with 2 more admissions that came in during the early morning hours. But my mind kept drifting back to room 12 and the mystery it contained. Every time I passed the door, I found myself slowing down, listening for any sounds that might indicate the patient was waking up. By 6 a.m., the morning shift was arriving and I was gathering my things to leave. The lost and found ring was still on my finger and I knew I should return it to the storage closet before leaving. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity about the similar ring in room 12, or maybe it was just the simple pleasure of wearing something so beautiful for a little while longer. I decided to leave it on until my next shift. After all, it had been unclaimed for 18 months. A few more days wouldn't matter. And if anyone came looking for it, the ring would be easy to find and return. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed room 12 one more time. The door was still closed, the patient presumably still sleeping off the anesthesia. But as I reached the elevator bank, I heard a voice behind me that made me freeze in place. "Nurse." The voice was deep, rich with a slight accent that I couldn't quite place, but that made my pulse quicken. "Nurse, could you come here, please?" I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The door to room 12 was open, and I could see the patient sitting up in bed, his dark eyes focused directly on me. Even from this distance, I could see that he was fully awake and alert, the grogginess of anesthesia completely gone. "Yes," I called back, my voice steady despite the nervousness coursing through me. "Could you come in here for a moment? I have some questions." There was something in his tone that made refusing seem impossible, even though my shift was officially over and I should be heading home to relieve the babysitter and get Sophia ready for school. I glanced at the nurse's station, but Sarah was busy with a phone call and the incoming day shift was still getting their assignments. I walked back down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The ring on my finger seemed to be growing warmer, and I resisted the urge to hide my hand behind my back. When I reached the doorway, I paused, suddenly aware of how small the room felt with him, awake and conscious. "How are you feeling?" I asked, falling back on professional protocol. "Any pain or discomfort?" He was studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact. His eyes were darker than I'd initially thought, not brown but nearly black, with thick lashes that would have been beautiful on a woman. But there was nothing feminine about the rest of him. Even sitting in a hospital bed wearing a standard issue gown, he radiated a kind of masculine power that filled the room. "I'm fine," he said, his accent more noticeable now that he was speaking in full sentences. Italian, I realized, or at least Italian-influenced. "The pain is manageable. But I need to ask you something important." I stepped a little closer to the bed, noting that he'd managed to sit up completely despite the shoulder wound. Most patients would still be lying flat, dealing with dizziness and nausea from the anesthesia. But he seemed completely alert and focused, as if being shot and operated on was just another minor inconvenience in his day. "What can I help you with?" I asked, keeping my voice professionally neutral. His eyes moved from my face down to my hands, and I saw the exact moment when he spotted the ring. His entire body went rigid, his face transforming from polite inquiry to something much more intense and dangerous. The change was so sudden and dramatic that I instinctively took a step backward. "Where did you find this ring?" he asked, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, but carrying a weight that made the air in the room feel thick and oppressive. I looked down at my hand, at the ring that had been feeling heavier and warmer all night. Under his intense stare, it seemed to catch the light and throw it back like a beacon, impossible to ignore or deny. I started, but found my throat dry. I swallowed hard and tried again. "It was in the hospital's lost and found. It's been there for over a year. No one ever claimed it. He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying my face as if he could read the truth written there. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the emotion underneath. Take it off? Excuse me? The ring. Take it off and bring it here. There was something in his tone that made arguing seem not just inadvisable, but potentially dangerous. With trembling fingers, I slipped the ring off and approached the bed. He held out his hand, palm up, and I placed the ring in it carefully, making sure not to touch his skin. He stared at the ring for what felt like an eternity, turning it over in his palm and examining every detail. I could see his jaw clench and unclench, the muscles in his neck standing out with tension. When he finally looked up at me, there was a rawness in his eyes that made my chest tight with sympathy. "This belonged to my sister," he said quietly. "Isabella. She's been missing for 5 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the visitor's chair beside his bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Missing? She disappeared when she was 16. No trace, no ransom demand, nothing. Like she just vanished. He closed his fist around the ring, holding it against his chest. This ring has been in our family for 4 generations. My great-great-grandmother brought it from Sicily when she came to America. Isabella never took it off, never. I stared at him, my mind racing to process what he was telling me. You think you think something happened to her here? At the hospital? I don't know. He opened his hand again, staring at the ring like it held all the answers to questions that had been torturing him for years. But this is the first real clue I've had since she disappeared. And you found it here. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a piece of lost jewelry. It was evidence, possibly the key to solving a missing person case that had clearly destroyed this man's life. I thought about my own daughter, about how I would feel if Sophia just disappeared one day, and my heart broke for him. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. I had no idea. If I had known you couldn't have known. He looked at me again, and I saw that some of the dangerous intensity had faded, replaced by a grief so deep it made my eyes water. But I need to know everything. When exactly did this ring show up in your lost and found? Who brought it in? Was there anything else with it? I tried to think, to remember the details from earlier that night when I'd been sorting through the old items. I don't know the exact date it came in, but there should be records. Everything that goes into Lost and Found gets logged with the date and the circumstances of how it was found. I need to see those records. I can't just give you access to hospital records. There are privacy laws, procedures, double quotes. He studied me for a moment, and I could practically see him calculating something behind those dark eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler but no less determined. "What's your name?" Elena Martinez. Elena? The way he said it with that slight Italian accent made it sound like music. "I'm Alessandra Toretti, and I think you might be the answer to prayers I've been saying for 5 years. The name Toretti rang a bell somewhere in the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite place it. It sounded familiar in the way that names from the news sometimes did, something I'd heard but hadn't paid close attention to. "Mr. Toretti, I understand how important this must be to you, but I can't just hand over hospital records to a patient. There are protocols double quotes, Elena." He leaned forward slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his shoulder wound. "I know this is a lot to ask. I know you don't know me and you have no reason to trust me. But that ring is the only connection I have to my sister. The only hope I have of finding out what happened to her." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability beneath the obvious strength that made me want to help him. But there was also something else, something that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. A sense of danger of stepping into something much bigger and more complicated than I could handle. "I could ask my supervisor about the proper procedures for requesting information," I offered. "There might be a way to get you access to those records through the police or double quotes." "No police." The words came out sharp and fast with an edge that made me straighten in my chair. "Not yet, not until I know more." "Why not?" "If your sister is missing, surely the police. The police have been looking for Isabella for 5 years. They've found nothing. They've given up." His hand tightened around the ring. "But this is new. This is hope. And I can't risk having it buried in bureaucratic red tape while Isabella might still be out there somewhere, needing help." I understood his frustration, but his reluctance to involve the police sent up red flags in my mind. In my experience, people who avoided law enforcement usually had good reasons that didn't always align with doing the right thing. Mr. Toretti, I want to help you find your sister, but I can't break hospital policy. I could lose my job and I have a daughter to support. I'm a single mother, and this job is all I have. Something shifted in his expression when I mentioned Sophia, a softness that hadn't been there before. How old is your daughter? 6. What's her name? Sophia. He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing over the ring in his palm. Isabella was 6 when our parents died. I was 17, barely old enough to take care of myself, let alone a little girl. But I promised her that I would always protect her, that nothing bad would ever happen to her as long as I was around. The pain in his voice was so raw that I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I thought about Sophia, about the promises I made to her every day, that Mommy would always come home from work, that we would always have enough to eat, that she was safe and loved no matter what. You were just a child yourself, I said softly. I was the only family she had left. And I failed her. He looked up at me and I could see the guilt and self-blame that had been eating at him for years. Please, Elena, I'm not asking you to break the law or put your job at risk. I'm just asking you to help me find out when and how that ring ended up in your lost and found. Surely there's a way to do that without violating any policies. I found myself wavering. There was something about him, about the pain in his voice and the desperate hope in his eyes, that made me want to help despite my better judgment. And he was right, checking the lost and found records didn't seem like it should be a major violation of hospital policy. I could look at the records, I said slowly, just to see when the ring was brought in and by whom. But that's all I can do without going through proper channels. Relief flooded his features, transforming his face completely. For a moment, the dangerous edge was gone and he looked younger, more vulnerable. Thank you. That's all I'm asking for right now. I stood up from the chair, smoothing down my scrubs and trying to regain some sense of professional distance. But the ring was still in his hand, catching the morning light streaming through the window, and I couldn't stop staring at it. I'll check the records when I come in for my next shift, I said. Tonight. And if I find anything helpful, I'll let you know. When does your shift start? 7 p.m., he nodded, carefully tucking the ring into the pocket of his hospital gown. I'll be here. Mr. Toretti, you should be discharged later today once the doctor clears you. You don't need to stay in the hospital just to wait for me. I'm not going anywhere until I have answers about my sister. There was a finality in his voice that made it clear arguing would be pointless. I had a feeling that Alessandro Toretti was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and right now what he wanted was information about Isabella. I should go, I said, suddenly aware that I was already late getting home. My daughter will be waking up soon, and I need to get her ready for school. Of course. Thank you, Elena, more than you know. I was halfway to the door when he spoke again. Elena? I turned back to face him. Be careful with who you trust. If something happened to Isabella at this hospital, then someone here might not want the truth to come out. His words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't even considered that possibility, that Isabella's disappearance might be connected to someone who still worked here, someone I saw every day. The thought was terrifying and surreal, like something out of a movie rather than my ordinary life. I'll be careful, I promised, though I wasn't even sure what I was promising to be careful about. Good, and Elena? When you check those records tonight, don't tell anyone else what you're looking for. Not your supervisor, not the other nurses. No one. I wanted to ask him why, wanted to understand what he thought might happen if I mentioned it to someone else. But there was something in his eyes that made me simply nod and walk out of the room without another word. The elevator ride down to the ground floor felt longer than usual, and I spent the time staring at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked tired, which wasn't surprising after a long night shift, but there was something else in my face, a tension I hadn't noticed before. The ring was gone from my finger, but I could still feel it there, like a phantom limb that couldn't quite be forgotten. Outside, the morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and car exhaust from the busy Boston streets. My car was parked in the employee lot, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a crack in the windshield that I couldn't afford to fix. It wasn't much, but it was reliable transportation, and reliability was more important than appearance in my world. As I drove through the familiar streets toward home, I couldn't stop thinking about Alessandro Toretti and his missing sister. The name was still nagging at me, that sense that I should recognize it from somewhere. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, I decided to look it up online once Sophia left for school. Our apartment was on the second floor of a 3-story building that had seen better days. The hallway always smelled like someone's cooking and the carpet was worn thin in places, but it was clean and safe and within my budget. More importantly, it was in a good school district for Sophia. I unlocked the door quietly, hoping not to wake Sophia if she was still sleeping. But as soon as I stepped inside, I could hear the television in the living room and her soft voice talking to someone. "Mama," she called out when she heard the door close. "You're home." I found her curled up on the couch in her favorite purple pajamas, having what appeared to be a serious conversation with her stuffed elephant. Mr. Peanuts, Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor who watched Sophia during my night shifts, was dozing in the armchair with a book open in her lap. "Good morning, baby," I whispered, bending down to kiss Sophia's forehead. Her dark hair was messy from sleep, and she smelled like the strawberry shampoo we used during bath time. "Did you sleep okay?" Mrs. Chen made pancakes for breakfast, and we watched cartoons. "But I missed you." "I missed you too." I gently shook Mrs. Chen awake. "Thank you so much for staying with her. How was she?" "Oh, an angel as always," Mrs. Chen said, gathering her things. "No problems at all." She went to bed right on time and slept through the night. After Mrs. Chen left, I helped Sophia get ready for school, braiding her hair and making sure she had everything she needed for the day. The routine was comforting and normal, a stark contrast to the strange and unsettling encounter I'd had at the hospital. As I watched Sophia eat her cereal and chatter about an upcoming field trip to the Science Museum, I tried to push thoughts of Alessandro Toretti and his missing sister to the back of my mind. But even after Sophia left for school and I finally had a chance to shower and change into comfortable clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted in my life. The memory of his dark eyes and the pain in his voice when he talked about Isabella stayed with me as I tried to catch a few hours of sleep before my next shift. When I woke up that afternoon, the first thing I did was open my laptop and search for Alessandro Toretti Boston. What I found made my blood run cold and explained why his name had seemed familiar. The search results were filled with news articles and police reports spanning several years. Alessandro Toretti wasn't just any grieving brother looking for his missing sister. He was the head of one of Boston's most powerful crime families, a man whose name appeared in connection with everything from racketeering to money laundering to suspected murder. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking as I scrolled through article after article detailing the Toretti family's alleged criminal activities. There were photos of Alessandro leaving courthouses after various hearings, always surrounded by expensive lawyers and looking every inch the dangerous man I'd sensed him to be. But there were also articles about his sister's disappearance, about the massive search effort he'd funded, about the reward money he posted for any information about Isabella's whereabouts. The picture that emerged was complex and troubling. Alessandro Toretti was clearly a criminal, a man who lived in a world of violence and illegal activities. But he was also a brother who had been searching desperately for his missing sister for 5 years, using every resource at his disposal to try to find her. I closed the laptop and sat back on my couch trying to process what I'd learned. I'd promised to help him find information about when Isabella's ring had appeared in our Lost and Found, but now I understood that helping him meant getting involved with the Mafia. The very thought was terrifying, but I couldn't forget the pain in his voice when he talked about his sister. Couldn't stop thinking about how I would feel if something happened to Sophia. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly as I tried to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call in sick for my shift and avoid the whole situation entirely. But another part of me kept thinking about a 16-year-old girl who had disappeared without a trace, about a family heirloom that had somehow ended up in our hospital's Lost and Found, about the possibility that I might be the key to solving a mystery that had been destroying someone's life for 5 years. By the time I had to leave for work, I made my decision. I would check the Lost and Found records as I promised, but I would be careful. I wouldn't take any unnecessary risks, and if things felt too dangerous, I would find a way to remove myself from the situation safely. But even as I made that promise to myself, I had a feeling that it might already be too late for caution. Something had been set in motion when I put that ring on my finger, and I was no longer sure I could control where it would lead. The hospital looked different when I arrived for my evening shift. The same fluorescent lights, the same antiseptic smell, the same busy corridors filled with patients and staff. But now I saw it with new eyes, wondering if someone here had been involved in Isabella's disappearance, wondering if the person responsible might be someone I worked with every day. I checked in with Sarah, who was working a double shift, and received my patient assignments for the night. Room 12 was listed as empty. Alessandro had been discharged that morning as expected. But somehow I'd known he wouldn't just leave. He'd said he would be there when I arrived, and I had no doubt he'd found a way to keep that promise. The first few hours of my shift passed normally. I attended to patients, updated charts, and administered medications according to schedule. But all the while, I was thinking about the lost and found records and trying to figure out the best time to access them without drawing attention from my colleagues. The lost and found storage closet was located near the administrative offices, in a part of the hospital that was usually quiet during evening shifts. Most of the administrative staff left by 5 p.m., leaving only security guards and the occasional night supervisor in that section of the building. Around 10 p.m., during my scheduled break, I made my way to the administrative wing. The hallways were dimly lit and eerily quiet, with only the distant sounds of the hospital's main areas reaching this far from the patient floors. I used my key card to access the storage room, my heart pounding as the lock clicked open. The lost and found records were kept in a filing cabinet near the back of the room, organized by date and type of item. I pulled out the drawer labeled 2019 to 2020 and began searching through the manila folders, looking for entries related to jewelry. It took me almost 20 minutes to find what I was looking for, but when I did, my hands began shaking so badly I almost dropped the file. The entry was dated November 15th, 2019, almost exactly 2 years ago. The ring had been found in the emergency department bathroom by a member of the cleaning staff and turned into the nurse's station. But it was the additional notes on the form that made my blood run cold. The ring hadn't been found alone. It had been discovered along with other items that suggested a struggle: a torn piece of clothing, what appeared to be blood stains on the floor, and scratch marks on the bathroom door that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. All of these items had been turned over to hospital security, who had contacted the Boston Police Department. According to the notes, an investigation had been opened, but no conclusions had been reached and no suspect had been identified. The case had eventually gone cold, and the evidence had been returned to the hospital's lost and found when no one claimed it. I photocopied the relevant pages, my hands still trembling as I operated the machine. The implications of what I was reading were staggering. Isabella hadn't just lost her ring at the hospital. She'd been there, possibly injured, possibly worse. And someone had covered it up or at least allowed the investigation to die without resolution. I was so focused on the documents that I almost didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway outside. But when I did, they made my heart stop completely. Someone was walking toward the storage room, their shoes making soft clicking sounds against the linoleum floor. I quickly shut off the copy machine and shoved the original file back into the cabinet, but I wasn't fast enough to avoid being caught. The door to the storage room opened just as I was trying to fold the photocopies and slip them into my pocket. "Elena? What are you doing in here?" I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing in the doorway was Dr. Harrison, one of the senior physicians in the emergency department. He was in his late 50s with gray hair and kind eyes, and I'd always respected him as both a doctor and a supervisor. But right now, seeing him here at this moment, I felt nothing but fear. "Dr. Harrison," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We had a patient asking about lost items, and I was checking to see if we had anything that matched what he was looking for. At 10 o'clock at night? During their break? He was really upset about it. I promised I'd check when I had a chance. Dr. Harrison stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking shut seemed unnaturally loud in the small space. He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to believe my explanation. "What was the patient looking for?" he asked finally. "A ring, his ... His grandmother's ring. He thought it might have ended up here after she was treated in the EA a few months ago." "And did you find anything?" I shook my head, praying that the photocopies in my pocket weren't visible. Nothing that matched his description. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, but I could see doubt in his eyes. "Elena, you know that accessing lost and found records requires supervisor approval. We have those policies in place for good reasons." "I know, I'm sorry." "I was just trying to help. Next time, come to me or one of the other supervisors first. We can handle these requests through proper channels. Of course. It won't happen again. He stepped aside and gestured toward the door. You should get back to your patients. And Elena? If anyone else asks you to check lost and found records, refer them to administration. Don't try to handle it yourself. I nodded and walked past him toward the door, fighting the urge to run. But just as I reached for the handle, he spoke again. Elena? I turned back to face him, my throat tight with fear. Be careful who you try to help. Some patients aren't what they seem to be. The words sent ice through my veins. Was he warning me about Alessandro, or was there something more sinister in his comment? I managed a weak smile and a nod before escaping into the hallway. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of paranoia and anxiety. Every colleague who spoke to me seemed suspicious. Every supervisor who checked on my work seemed to be watching me more closely than usual. By the time my shift ended at 7 a.m., I was exhausted and on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound. As I walked toward the employee parking lot, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street from the hospital entrance. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside, but something about the car made me pause. It was expensive looking and seemed out of place in this neighborhood. I was fumbling for my car keys when a voice behind me made me spin around. Elena. Alessandro Toretti stood about 10 feet away, wearing dark jeans and a black sweater that did nothing to hide his powerful build. He looked completely different from the injured patient I met the night before, dangerous and commanding in a way that made my mouth go dry. Mr. Toretti, You said you'd be at the hospital. I was. I've been waiting for you. His dark eyes studied my face, and I could see him reading the tension and fear I was trying to hide. You found something? It wasn't a question. Somehow he could tell just by looking at me that my search had been successful. I glanced around the parking lot, suddenly aware of how isolated we were. The morning shift workers had already arrived and were inside the hospital, leaving the lot mostly empty. I found the records, I said quietly. But I'm not sure you're going to like what they say. Tell me. I pulled the folded photocopies from my pocket with hands that were still slightly shaking. The ring wasn't just lost. It was found with other evidence that suggested something violent might have happened. His entire body went rigid as I handed him the papers. He unfolded them carefully, his eyes scanning the text with an intensity that made me take a step backward. I watched his jaw clench as he read, watched his hands tighten on the papers until his knuckles went white. Blood? He said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. There was blood. The police investigated, but the case went cold. All the evidence was returned to lost and found when no one claimed it. He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was so raw that I felt tears prick at the corners of my own. She was here. My sister was here, and she was hurt, and I never knew. I'm so sorry. November 5th, 10th, 2019. He stared at the date on the papers. Do you know what happened here that night? Was there anything unusual, any incidents that might be connected? I shook my head. I wasn't working here then. I started this job about 8 months ago. But there would be records. Incident reports, security footage, employee schedules. Mr. Toretti, I can't access those kinds of records. That would require administrative approval, probably police involvement, ... double quotes. No police. His voice was sharp, final. Not until I know who I can trust. But if your sister was hurt here, if someone at the hospital was involved, ... then going through official channels could warn them that someone is getting close to the truth. He folded the papers carefully and slipped them into his jacket pocket. Elena, you've already done more than I had any right to ask. But I need to know if you'll help me with one more thing. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to say no, to walk away, to go home to Sophia and pretend this conversation had never happened. But the desperate hope in his eyes, combined with the image of a 16-year-old girl who had disappeared without a trace, made rational thought nearly impossible. What do you need? Access to the hospital that night. I want to see the bathroom where Isabella's ring was found, see if there's anything the investigators missed. And I want to look at any security footage from that date. I can't just give you access to the hospital. There are security protocols, cameras, guards, ... I'm not asking you to break in. I'm asking you to let me in. I stared at him, my mind racing to understand what he was proposing. You want me to help you get into the hospital illegally? I want you to help me find out what happened to my sister. The distinction felt important to him, but from my perspective, the end result was the same. He was asking me to risk my job, possibly my freedom, to help him conduct an unauthorized investigation. I can't, I said finally. I have a daughter. I can't risk losing my job or going to jail. I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler but no less intense. How much do you make here, Elena? Working night shifts, supporting a daughter on your own? The question caught me off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. About $32,000 a year, I admitted reluctantly. And you have no health insurance through work? Basic coverage. But the deductible is so high it might as well not exist. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. What if I told you I could pay you more for one night's work than you make in 6 months? What if I told you I could set up a trust fund for Sophia's education that would guarantee she could go to any college she wanted? My breath caught in my throat. That kind of money would change everything for us. No more choosing between groceries and Sophia's school supplies. No more lying awake at night worrying about what would happen if my car broke down or if I got sick and couldn't work. But it would also mean getting involved with a criminal, becoming part of whatever world Alessandro Toretti inhabited. And despite his obvious pain over his sister's disappearance, I couldn't forget what I'd read about him online. Money can't buy back a life, I said quietly. If we get caught, if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. I just need someone with access to get me inside. You don't have to do anything else, don't have to be involved in the actual investigation. Just get me through the door. And then what? You conduct your own investigation and potentially contaminate evidence? You confront whoever might be responsible and handle it your own way? His silence was answer enough. I can't be part of that, I said firmly. If you really want to find out what happened to Isabella, you should work with the police, not around them. The police had their chance. They failed her. His voice was bitter, angry. But you're right about one thing. I shouldn't have asked you to risk your safety or your future for something that's my responsibility. He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine that made my pulse quicken despite my fear. But let me ask you something, Elena. If it was Sophia who had disappeared, if you'd spent 5 years not knowing whether she was alive or dead, what would you do to get answers? How far would you go? The question hit me like a physical blow. The thought of Sophia disappearing, of not knowing where she was or whether she was safe, was so terrifying that it made my chest tight with panic. I would do whatever it took, I whispered. Then you understand why I can't wait for official channels or proper procedures. Isabella has been missing for 5 years. If she's still alive somewhere, every day can matter. I understood his desperation, but I also understood the reality of my situation. Getting involved with Alessandro Toretti could destroy everything I'd worked for, everything I built for Sophia and myself. I'm sorry, I said again. I truly am. But I can't help you with this. He nodded slowly, disappointment clear in his dark eyes. I understand, and I appreciate what you've already done. More than you know. He turned to walk away, but something made me call after him. Mr. Toretti? He stopped and looked back at me. If you do find a way to investigate what happened that night, be careful. Someone at the hospital warned me to be careful who I trust, and I think they might know more about Isabella's disappearance than they're letting on. His entire body went alert at my words. Who warned you? What exactly did they say? I told him about my encounter with Dr. Harrison, about the way he'd appeared in the lost and found room just as I was discovering Isabella's records. Alessandro listened intently, his expression growing darker with each detail. Dr. Harrison, he repeated. How long has he worked at the hospital? I don't know exactly. Several years at least. He's one of the senior physicians in the emergency department. Elena, I need you to promise me something. Don't be alone with Dr. Harrison. Don't put yourself in any situation where he might see you as a threat. You think he was involved in what happened to Isabella. I think someone at that hospital knows more than they're saying. And until I know who that someone is, you're not safe. His words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't considered that helping him, even in the limited way I had, might have put me in danger. But now that he'd said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. What should I do? Be careful. Watch your back. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. It was simple, elegant, with just his name and a phone number printed in black ink. "Day or night, Elena, if you feel threatened, if you need help, if you just want to talk about what you found, call me." I took the card, noting how expensive the paper felt between my fingers. "Why would you help me?" "You barely know me." "Because you helped me when you didn't have to." "Because you're a single mother trying to do right by her daughter." "And because if something happens to you because of what you've done for me, I'll never forgive myself." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that seemed at odds with everything I'd read about him online. For a moment, he didn't sound like a dangerous criminal. He sounded like a man who'd been carrying guilt and grief for so long that it had become part of his identity. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded once, then walked toward the black sedan I'd noticed earlier. I watched him go, noting the way he moved with predatory grace despite the shoulder injury he'd suffered less than 24 hours ago. When he reached the car, he paused and looked back at me. "Elena? Yes? Take care of yourself and your daughter. This isn't over." I knew he was talking about his investigation into Isabella's disappearance, but something in his tone made it sound like a promise and a warning wrapped into one. The sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into Boston traffic, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with a business card that felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. The drive home was a blur of conflicted thoughts and emotions. Part of me regretted not agreeing to help Alessandro further, haunted by the pain in his voice when he talked about his sister. But the rational part of my mind knew I'd made the right decision. Getting involved with the Mafia, even for seemingly noble reasons, was a line I couldn't cross. But even as I told myself I'd done the right thing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Alessandro Toretti was not a man who gave up easily, and Isabella's disappearance had clearly consumed his life for the past 5 years. Whether the first helped him or not, he was going to find a way to investigate what had happened at the hospital that night. And Dr. Harrison's warning echoed in my mind. Be careful who you try to help. Some patients aren't what they seem to be. Had he been warning me about Alessandro, or had there been a deeper meaning to his words? The timing of his appearance in the lost and found room, just as I was discovering Isabella's records, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made a decision. I would keep Alessandro's business card, and I would be extra careful at work, watching for any signs that someone suspected what I'd discovered. But I wouldn't actively help with his investigation. I couldn't risk Sophia's future, couldn't risk the stability we'd worked so hard to build. Sophia was still asleep when I got home, her dark hair spread across her pillow like silk. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a long moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing and feeling my heart clench with protective love. She was everything to me, the reason I worked double shifts and scraped together every penny, the reason I couldn't afford to take risks with dangerous men no matter how noble their motives might seem. But as I finally made my way to my own bed, I couldn't stop thinking about another little girl who had been loved and protected, until one day she wasn't. Isabella Toretti had been 16 when she disappeared, but she'd been 6 once too, sleeping peacefully in her bed while her older brother promised to keep her safe forever. I fell asleep with Alessandro's business card on my nightstand and woke up several hours later with a plan I knew was probably going to change my life forever. The plan was simple, at least in theory. I would find a way to access the security footage from November 15th, 2019, without involving Alessandro directly. If I discovered anything significant, I could decide then whether to share it with him or take it to the police myself. It was a compromise between my desire to help find Isabella and my need to protect Sophia and myself. The security office at the hospital was located in the basement near the maintenance departments and storage areas. I'd never been down there before, but I knew that all footage was archived and stored digitally for several years before being deleted. The trick would be accessing it without drawing attention from the security staff. My opportunity came 3 days later during another night shift. Around 2 a.m., we received multiple emergency calls, a 3-car accident that brought in 6 patients simultaneously. The entire emergency department went into crisis mode with all available staff focused on triage and treatment. During the chaos, I slipped away from the main floor and made my way to the basement. The security office was easy to find, marked with official signs and electronic locks that required key card access. But chaos had its advantages in the rush to provide additional security coverage for the multiple ambulance arrivals. The office had been left unlocked. I slipped inside, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the building. The room was filled with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the hospital, but what I needed was access to the archived footage. A bank of computers along one wall appeared to be the storage and retrieval system. It took me 20 minutes to figure out how to navigate the system, precious time during which I expected security guards to return at any moment. But finally, I found the archived footage from November 15, 2019, and began searching through the camera feeds from the emergency department. What I found made my blood run cold. The footage showed Isabella Toretti entering the hospital at approximately 8:30 p.m. She was alone, walking quickly and looking over her shoulder as if she was being followed or was afraid of something. She appeared to be injured. There was something wrong with her left arm. The way she held it suggested it might be broken or severely sprained. But it was what happened next that made me grab onto the desk for support. Isabella approached the nurse's station and spoke to someone off camera. A few minutes later, a man in scrubs appeared and led her toward the bathroom where her ring would later be found. The man's face was clearly visible in the security footage. It was Dr. Harrison. I watched in horror as the footage showed Dr. Harrison guiding Isabella toward the bathroom. They were only visible for a few seconds before disappearing from the camera's range. But what I saw was enough to make me physically sick. Dr. Harrison's hand was on Isabella's back, guiding her, but there was something possessive and threatening about the gesture. The timestamp showed that Isabella entered the bathroom area at 8:47 p.m. She never came back out. But Dr. Harrison did. At 9:23 p.m., he emerged from the area alone, his scrubs different from the ones he'd been wearing when he'd led Isabella away. He went directly to a maintenance closet, disposed of something in what appeared to be a medical waste container, then changed his gloves and returned to work as if nothing had happened. I copied the relevant footage onto a flash drive, my hands shaking so badly I could barely operate the computer. The implications of what I discovered were staggering. Dr. Harrison, a respected physician I'd worked with for months, had been involved in Isabella's disappearance. And somehow he covered it up so thoroughly that the police investigation had found nothing. I was just finishing the download when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the security office. Panic flooded through me as I quickly closed the computer programs and shoved the flash drive into my pocket. I had to get out of there before whoever was coming discovered me. But as I turned toward the door, it opened and Dr. Harrison stepped inside. For a moment, we just stared at each other in stunned silence. His eyes took in my presence in the restricted security office, the guilty expression on my face, and I could see the exact moment when he realized what I'd been doing. "Elena," he said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "What are you doing here?" I was looking for you," I said, the light coming out weak and unconvincing. "Someone said you might be down here checking on something." "No one knows I'm down here." His voice was calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. "And you shouldn't be here either. This is a restricted area." "I know, I'm sorry." "I'll just go back upstairs, ... I started toward the door, but he stepped sideways, blocking my path. The movement was subtle but effective, trapping me in the small room with him. "Elena, I think we need to talk about what's been going on lately. Your sudden interest in lost and found records, your questions about missing items, your presence in restricted areas of the hospital." My mouth went dry. He knew. Somehow, he knew everything. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, could see the cold calculation in his eyes that I'd somehow missed during all the months we'd worked together. "I think someone has been asking you to look into things that are none of your business. Things that could be dangerous for everyone involved." "Dr. Harrison, I need to get back to my patients, ... Your patients are being taken care of. The emergency from the accident is under control." He tilted his head slightly, studying my face like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You know, Elena, I've always liked you. You're a good nurse, a hard worker, a devoted mother. It would be a shame if something happened to change that." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I thought about the flash drive in my pocket, about the footage that showed him leading Isabella Toretti to her disappearance, and fought to keep my expression neutral. Nothing's going to change. I just want to do my job and take care of my daughter. "Good, that's what I want to hear." He stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. But Elena, I need you to understand something. There are people in this world who will use their kindness against you. People who will ask you to do things that seem helpful but are actually very dangerous. I understand. I hope you do. Because if someone were to involve you in something illegal, something that put your job or your freedom at risk, I'd hate to see you lose everything you've worked for. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I tried to speak. Go back to your patients, Elena. And remember, if anyone asks you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, anything at all, you can always come to me. I'll protect you. The word protect coming from his mouth made my stomach turn, but I managed to nod again and walk past him to the door. I half expected him to stop me, to search me and find the flash drive, but he let me go. I made it to the elevator before my legs gave out and I had to lean against the wall for support. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the button for the main floor. The footage I copied was evidence of a crime, possibly murder, and the person responsible was someone I worked with every day. But more immediately terrifying was the realization that Dr. Harrison suspected what I was doing. His appearance in the security office couldn't have been coincidental. He'd followed me. Or he'd been watching me, waiting for me to make a move that would confirm his suspicions. I thought about Alessandra's warning about not being alone with Dr. Harrison, and realized how naive I'd been to think I could investigate this safely on my own. I was in way over my head, and I had evidence that could expose a killer, evidence that put both Sophia and me in immediate danger. By the time I reached the main floor, I'd made my decision. As soon as my shift ended, I was going to call Alessandro Toretti and tell him everything. Whatever danger came with getting involved with the Mafia, it couldn't be worse than the danger I was already in. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of paranoia and fear. Every time Dr. Harrison appeared in my peripheral vision, my heart raced. Every time he spoke to me, even about routine medical matters, I heard the underlying threat in his voice. The flash drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and I was terrified that somehow he would sense its presence. When 7 a.m. finally arrived and my replacement came in, I gathered my things with hands that were still trembling slightly. Dr. Harrison was nowhere to be seen, which was both a relief and somehow more frightening. Not knowing where he was meant not knowing if he was watching me, following me, planning something. I made it to the parking lot without incident, but as I approached my car, I saw a figure leaning against the hood. For a moment, my heart stopped, thinking it was Dr. Harrison. But as I got closer, I recognized the tall frame and dark hair of Alessandro Toretti. Elena! He straightened up as I approached, his dark eyes searching my face with an intensity that missed nothing. What happened? You look terrified. How did you know I'd be here? How did you know something happened? I've been watching the hospital. When you didn't come out with the other night shift workers, I got worried. And you were right to be careful. I saw Dr. Harrison leave through the staff entrance about an hour ago. He looked agitated. I fumbled for the keys to my car, suddenly desperate to get away from the hospital, away from the place where I worked alongside a killer. We need to talk. But not here. My car's around the corner. Leave yours here and come with me. Every rational thought in my head screamed that getting into a car with a known criminal was exactly the wrong thing to do. But rational thought had abandoned me completely. All I could think about was the security footage, Dr. Harrison's threats, and the fact that I was now in possession of evidence that could destroy a dangerous man's life. Alessandro's car was a black BMW, expensive but not flashy, the kind of vehicle that could blend in anywhere. He opened the passenger door for me, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed strange coming from someone with his reputation. As we drove through the early morning Boston streets, I told him everything. About sneaking into the security office, about the footage showing Dr. Harrison leading Isabella away, about his threatening conversation with me afterward. Alessandro listened in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles went white. When I finished, he pulled into an empty parking lot and turned to face me. The expression on his face was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a combination of grief, rage, and something that looked almost like relief. You found her, he said quietly. After 5 years, you found what happened to my sister. The footage shows her going into that area, but it doesn't show what happened after that. We don't know for sure, We know enough. His voice was hard, cold. We know Harrison was the last person to see her alive. We know he changed his clothes afterward and disposed of something. We know he's been covering it up for 5 years. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and held it out to him. This is a copy of the security footage. But Alessandro, we have to be careful about how we handle this. Dr. Harrison suspects I've been investigating. He threatened me tonight. Alessandro took the flash drive, staring at it like it contained the answers to every question that had been torturing him for 5 years, which, in a way, it did. He won't threaten you again, he said, and the quiet certainty in his voice made me shiver. What are you going to do? What I should have done years ago. What I would have done if I'd known where to look. Alessandro, you can't just handle this yourself. We have evidence now. We can go to the police, have him arrested properly. The police had their chance. They investigated and found nothing, even though the evidence was right there. Either they're incompetent or someone was protecting Harrison. He looked at me, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that was both frightening and mesmerizing. How long has Harrison worked at that hospital, Elena? How long has he been in a position to hurt vulnerable people? I thought about it, trying to remember what I knew about Dr. Harrison's history at Boston General. Several years at least. Maybe longer, so Isabella might not have been his first victim. Or his last. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but now that he'd said it, I felt sick. How many other young women might have disappeared after encountering Dr. Harrison? How many families were still searching for answers, still holding on to hope that their loved ones might come home? But if you confront him yourself, if you handle this outside the legal system, then justice gets served instead of buried in bureaucracy and corruption. Alessandro started the car again, his jaw set with determination. Elena, you've done more than I ever dared hope. You've given me proof of what happened to Isabella. But this is where you step away. This is where you go home to your daughter and forget you were ever involved in this. I can't just forget about it. I have to work with him, see him every day, double quotes. No, you don't. You're done working there. What do you mean? I mean you're never going back to Boston General. As of today, you have a new job. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You can't just decide that for me. I need this job. Sophia and I depend on it. Elena, Harrison threatened you tonight. He knows you have information that could destroy him. Do you really think you're safe working alongside him for even one more day? The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on the evidence and what it meant for Isabella that I hadn't fully considered the immediate danger to myself. But Alessandro was right. Dr. Harrison had made it clear that he saw me as a threat, and threatening people seemed to be just the beginning of what he was capable of. But I can't just quit. I have bills, responsibilities, double quotes. I told you I would take care of that. I meant it. Alessandro reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. There's enough in there to cover your expenses for the next 6 months. After that, we'll figure out something more permanent. I took the envelope, noting its weight and thickness. I can't accept this. I can't take money from you. Elena, you've given me the first real hope I've had in 5 years. You've put yourself in danger to help me find out what happened to my sister. Let me return the favor by keeping you and Sophia safe, but accepting money from you makes me. It makes me part of your world. And I can't do that. You're already part of my world, he said gently. The moment you put on Isabella's ring, the moment you decided to help me instead of walking away, you became part of this. The question now is whether you trust me to protect you or whether you think you're safer trying to handle Harrison on your own. I thought about Dr. Harrison's cold eyes, about the way he blocked my exit from the security office, about the subtle but unmistakable threat in his voice. Then I thought about Sophia, about what would happen to her if something happened to me. What kind of job? I asked finally. My family has legitimate businesses. Medical clinics, charity organizations, community outreach programs. You're a nurse with excellent credentials and a clean record. There are dozens of positions where you could work and be safe. And in exchange? In exchange for nothing? This isn't a transaction. Elena, this is me making sure that helping me doesn't destroy your life. I stared at the envelope in my hands, at the promise of financial security and safety it represented. But accepting it felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, stepping into a world I'd only read about in news articles and crime novels. I need time to think about it. Time is something we don't have much of. Harrison knows you're a threat now. Every moment you delay is another moment he has to plan how to eliminate that threat. The word eliminate sent ice through my veins. I thought about Sophia sleeping peacefully in her bed, about how she depended on me for everything, about what would happen to her if Dr. Harrison decided I knew too much to live. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, but I want to know exactly what you're planning to do about Dr. Harrison. I want to know that you're not just going to kill him and dump his body somewhere. Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, staring out the windshield at the empty parking lot. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Harrison has been living with the knowledge of what he did to Isabella for 5 years. He's been going to work every day, treating patients, pretending to be a healer while knowing he's a killer. That kind of psychological burden ... it changes a person. Makes them sloppy, paranoid. What does that mean? It means when I confront him, when I show him the evidence you found, he's going to crack. And when he does, he's going to tell me exactly what happened that night and where my sister is buried. And then justice will be served. It wasn't really an answer, but I could see from his expression that it was the only answer I was going to get. Alessandro Toretti lived in a world where justice didn't always come from courtrooms and juries, and I was naive to think he would suddenly embrace the legal system that had failed him for 5 years. I should call in sick today, I said finally. Buy myself some time to figure out what to do. Good idea. But Elena, don't go home right now. If Harrison suspects you have evidence against him, he might be watching your apartment. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but now that he'd said it, I felt another wave of fear wash over me. Sophia was at home with Mrs. Chen, completely unaware that her mother had stumbled into a nightmare that could destroy everything they'd built together. Where should I go? I know a place. Safe, quiet, where you can think clearly and make decisions without worrying about who might be watching. Getting into Alessandro's car had felt like crossing a line. Going somewhere private with him felt like jumping off a cliff. But the alternative, going home and potentially leading a killer to my daughter, was unthinkable. Just for a few hours, I said. Until I can figure out a plan. Just for a few hours, he agreed. But somehow I knew it was already too late for plans and caution and careful decisions. I'd found evidence that could solve a 5-year-old mystery, and in doing so, I'd stepped into a world where the rules I'd lived by my entire life no longer applied. Alessandro drove us to a part of Boston I'd never seen before, an older neighborhood where the buildings were lower and the streets narrower. He parked in front of a small cafe that looked like it had been there for decades, with faded awnings and hand-painted signs in both English and Italian. My family owns this place, he explained as we got out of the car. It's closed on Sundays, but we can talk privately upstairs. The cafe was exactly what I'd expected from the exterior, worn wooden floors, mismatched tables and chairs, and the lingering scent of espresso and baked goods. But it was also warm and welcoming in a way that made me feel unexpectedly safe. Alessandro led me through the dining area to a narrow staircase that climbed to a small apartment above the restaurant. The space was simply furnished but comfortable, with a couch and armchair arranged around a coffee table, a small kitchen visible through an archway. This is where Isabella and I lived after our parents died, Alessandro said quietly, watching me take in the details of the apartment. Before I could afford something bigger, something safer, I could see traces of a teenage girl's presence in the space, a bookshelf filled with young adult novels, a bulletin board covered with photos and concert tickets, a small desk that had probably been used for homework. It was like a shrine to a life interrupted, preserved exactly as Isabella had left it. You kept her room, I observed. I kept everything. Every piece of clothing, every book, every stupid teenage poster she hung on her walls. Because letting go of her things felt like giving up hope that she'd come home to claim them. Pain in his voice was so raw that I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I thought about Sophia's room, about her favorite stuffed animals and the artwork she'd hung on her walls, and tried to imagine keeping it all exactly the same for 5 years while not knowing if she was alive or dead. She's going to come home now, I said softly. Not the way you hoped, but she's going to come home. Alessandro nodded, but I could see the conflict in his expression. Finding out what had happened to Isabella was what he'd wanted for 5 years. But the reality of it, the confirmation that she was really gone, was devastating in its finality. Tell me about her, I said, settling onto the couch and gesturing for him to join me. Tell me who she was before she disappeared. He sat in the armchair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a moment, the dangerous edge that seemed to surround him constantly faded, and I could see the loving older brother he'd been. She was vibrant, full of life and dreams and plans for the future. She wanted to be a teacher, work with little kids because she said they saw the world more clearly than adults. A small smile touched his lips at the memory. She used to practice on the neighborhood children, teaching them Italian phrases and helping them with their homework. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she was smart, too smart for her own good sometimes. She asked questions, pushed boundaries, never just accepted things because adults told her that's how they were. Is that what got her in trouble? Her curiosity? Alessandra's expression darkened. I think she saw something she wasn't supposed to see, knew something that made her dangerous to someone. The night she disappeared, she'd been acting strange for weeks. Nervous, looking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds. Did she tell you what was bothering her? I tried to get her to talk to me, but she kept saying it was probably nothing, that she was just being paranoid. I should have pushed harder, should have made her tell me what was going on. You were barely an adult yourself. You couldn't have known ... I was her guardian, her protector. It was my job to keep her safe, and I failed. The guilt and self-blame in his voice were so familiar that my heart ached for him. I'd spent years carrying similar guilt about my father's abandonment, wondering what I could have done differently to make him stay, to make our family enough for him. Alessandro, guilt doesn't bring people back. And it doesn't help solve the problem. What would help solve the problem is making sure Harrison pays for what he did to her. And what about after that? What happens to you when this is over? He looked at me curiously, as if the question had never occurred to him. What do you mean? I mean, you've spent 5 years focused on finding Isabella. Your whole life has been about that search, that hope. What do you do with yourself when it's finished? I haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe it's time you did. Maybe it's time you thought about what Isabella would have wanted for you. What kind of life she would have wanted you to build. Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying my face as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd heard it before. She used to tell me I needed to find someone to love, someone who would make me happy instead of just feared. She said I was too young to be so serious all the time, that I needed to remember how to smile. She sounds like she was very wise for 16. She was wise for any age. He leaned back in his chair, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. What about you, Elena? What do you want your life to look like when this is over? I want Sophia to be safe. I want to be able to give her the kind of childhood she deserves, full of opportunities and choices and security. And what about what you want for yourself? Not as a mother, but as a woman? The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so many years focused entirely on Sophia's needs that I'd almost forgotten I was allowed to have wants and dreams of my own. I don't know, I admitted. It's been so long since I thought about that. When was the last time someone took care of you instead of the other way around? The question hit me harder than it should have. I couldn't remember the last time someone had worried about my well-being, had offered to protect me, had tried to make my life easier instead of more complicated. I don't need anyone to take care of me, I said automatically. That's not what I asked. I looked at him, at the intensity in his dark eyes and the way he seemed to see right through all my carefully constructed defenses. There was something about Alessandro Toretti that made me want to be honest, even when honesty felt dangerous. Never, I said quietly. I've been taking care of everyone else since I was a teenager. My mother when she was sick, Sophia since she was born, myself because there was no one else to do it. That sounds lonely. It's just life. It's what you do when you have responsibilities. It doesn't have to be. There was something in his voice, a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his reputation that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. We were sitting in his missing sister's apartment, discussing evidence of her murder, and somehow I felt safer and more understood than I had in years. Alessandro ... double quotes. Elena, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with Harrison, whatever I have to do to get justice for Isabella, I'm going to make sure you and Sophia are protected. Not just from him, but from any fallout that might come from this. Why? Why would you do that for us? Because you're a good person who got pulled into something that isn't your fault. Because you have a daughter who needs her mother. And because ... double quotes, he paused, seeming to struggle with words. Because in the 5 years since Isabella disappeared, You're the first person who made me feel like there might be something in this world worth protecting besides revenge. His words hung in the air between us, charged with an emotion that made my pulse quicken. I knew I should be afraid of him, should be thinking about escape routes and safety plans. But instead, I found myself wondering what it would be like to trust someone completely, to let someone else carry some of the burdens I've been carrying alone for so long. I should go home, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Sophia will be waking up soon, and I need to figure out how to explain why I'm not going to work today. Call in sick. Tell them you have a family emergency. It's not really a lie. He was right. This was a family emergency, even if it wasn't my family. I'd become part of Isabella's story, part of the quest for justice that had consumed Alessandro's life for 5 years. I pulled out my phone and called the hospital's main number, asking to be transferred to the emergency department. Sarah answered on the second ring, sounding tired and stressed from the continuing aftermath of the multi-car accident. Sarah, it's Elena. I'm not going to be able to come in tonight. I have a family emergency. Everything okay? Just some things I need to take care of. I should be back tomorrow night, no problem. Take care of yourself. I hung up, noting that I just lied to my supervisor and feeling surprisingly little guilt about it. The rules I'd lived by for so long, honesty, following procedures, avoiding conflict, seemed inadequate for the situation one found myself in. Now what? I asked Alessandro. Now we wait for Harrison to make a move. He knows you were in that security office, knows you might have found something. He's going to have to decide whether to run, whether to try to silence you, or whether to bluff it out and hope you don't have real evidence. And which one do you think he'll choose? Men like Harrison don't run. They've spent years building their reputations, their positions in the community. Running would mean admitting guilt, giving up everything they've worked for. Alessandro stood up and moved to the window, looking down at the street below. He's going to try to handle you himself, quietly, before you can share whatever you found with anyone else. Handle me how? I don't know. But I'm not going to let it happen. There was a finality in his voice that made me shiver. I thought about Dr. Harrison, about the respect he commanded at the hospital, about how trusted and well-regarded he was. No one would ever suspect him of being capable of murder, which had probably been his protection for the past 5 years. What if we're wrong? I asked. What if there's another explanation for what we saw in that footage? Alessandro turned from the window to look at me. Do you really believe that? I thought about Isabella walking into the hospital alone and injured, about Dr. Harrison leading her away, about the way he'd changed his clothes and disposed of something afterward. I thought about his appearance in the lost and found room, about his threats, about the cold calculation I'd seen in his eyes. No, I admitted. I don't believe that. Then we're not wrong. And Harrison knows we're not wrong. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I looked down to see a number I didn't recognize. Elena, this is Dr. Harrison. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I'd like to meet with you to discuss some concerns I have about your safety. Could you meet me at the hospital this afternoon? I think there are some things you need to know. I showed the message to Alessandro, watching his expression grow darker as he read. He's moving faster than I expected, he said. He's not going to wait to see what you do with whatever evidence you found. He's going to try to get you alone and vulnerable. What should I do? You should stay here safe while I handle this. You're going to meet with him? I'm going to end this. The simple statement sent ice through my veins. I thought about Dr. Harrison, about the 5 years he'd lived with the secret of what he'd done to Isabella, about the other potential victims who might have crossed his path. Part of me felt like he deserved whatever Alessandro had planned for him. But another part of me, the part that had spent years trying to heal people instead of hurt them, couldn't bear the thought of more violence. Alessandro, please. There has to be another way. Elena, this man killed my sister. He's threatened you. He's probably hurt others. What other way do you suggest? The police. The FBI. Someone in law enforcement who isn't connected to the local corruption. And how long would that take? How many lawyers and appeals and bureaucratic delays? How many more people would he hurt while the system slowly decides whether to believe us? But if you handle this yourself, if you make him disappear or whatever you're planning, then you become just like him. You become someone who takes lives instead of protecting them. Alessandro stepped closer to me, his dark eyes intense but not threatening. Elena, I'm not a good man. I've never pretended to be. I live in a world where violence is a tool, where justice comes from strength rather than courts. Isabella knew what I was when she disappeared, and she never judged me for it. But maybe she hoped you could be something different. Maybe she did, but hoping doesn't change reality. And reality is that some people can only be stopped by force. I understood his logic, even agreed with it to some extent. But I also knew that once he crossed that line with Dr. Harrison, there would be no going back. Whatever chance he had at a different kind of life, a life Isabella would have been proud of, would be gone forever. What if I could get him to confess? What if I could get him to tell us what happened to Isabella and where? Where she is? Elena, absolutely not. I'm not putting you in danger like that. I'm already in danger. He knows I have evidence against him. The only way I'm going to be safe is if he's caught and exposed, which is exactly what I'm going to make sure happens. But your way makes you a killer. My way makes him a confessed killer who goes to prison for the rest of his life. Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the decision. I could see the conflict in his face, the desire for immediate, violent revenge warring with something else, something that might have been hope for a different kind of resolution. How would you get him to confess? I don't know yet. But he wants to meet with me, wants to handle the threat I represent. Maybe I can use that against him. It's too dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. But at least this way, we might be able to get justice for Isabella without destroying your chance at a different kind of future. My future doesn't matter. Yes, it does. It mattered to Isabella, and it matters to me. The words surprised both of us. I hadn't meant to reveal how much I'd come to care about him in such a short time. How invested I'd become in his welfare as well as his quest for justice. Elena ... double quotes, I know what you're going to say. That I don't really know you, that I'm naive about what you're capable of. That getting involved with someone like you is dangerous for Sophia and me. All of those things are true. Maybe, but I also know that you've spent 5 years searching for your sister, that you've kept her room exactly the way she left it, that you blame yourself for her disappearance, even though you were barely more than a child when it happened. Those things don't erase what I am. No, but they show who you could be. Who you are underneath all the anger and guilt and violence. Alessandro reached out and touched my face gently, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected, that it made my breath catch in my throat. You see something in me that isn't there, Elena. I see something in you that you've forgotten is there. He was standing close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him. There was something happening between us, something that went beyond the shared crisis that had brought us together. If I let you try to get a confession from Harrison, if something happens to you ... then you'll make sure Sophia is taken care of, and you'll make Harrison pay for hurting both of us. Elena ... Alessandro, I need to do this. Not just for Isabella, not just for justice, but for me. I need to know I'm brave enough to face him, strong enough to get the truth. You've already proven how brave you are. Then let me prove it again. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his internal struggle clear in his expression. Finally, he nodded slowly. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. You're not going in there alone, and you're not going in without backup. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going to be close enough to hear every word of that conversation, and if things go wrong, I'm going to end it before he can hurt you. How? Leave that to me. But Elena, if you're going to do this, you need to understand the rules. You get him talking, you get him to confess, but the moment you feel unsafe, the moment things start to go wrong, you get out. No heroics, no trying to be the savior. You get out and let me handle the rest. Agreed. And afterward, regardless of what happens, you and Sophia disappear for a while. New city, new identities if necessary, until we're sure there's no retaliation coming. The thought of leaving Boston, of uprooting Sophia from her school and friends, was painful. But the thought of staying and living in fear, always wondering if Dr. Harrison had allies who might come after us, was worse. How long? However long it takes. Months, maybe years. Alessandro, I can't ask you to provide for us for years. That's not fair to you, Elena. You're giving me the chance to get justice for Isabella without becoming a monster in the process. You're giving me hope that there might be something good in my future instead of just revenge. Let me give you safety and security in return. There was something in his voice, an emotion I was afraid to identify, that made my heart race. This had started as a chance encounter in a hospital room, but it had become something much more significant, much more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay? Okay, I'll do it. I'll try to get Harrison to confess." "But Alessandro." "Yes? Promise me something. Promise me that afterward, after Isabella finally gets justice, you'll try to build the kind of life she would have wanted for you. The kind of life where you remember how to smile." He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still tracing along my cheekbone. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I promised to try." It wasn't everything I wanted to hear, but it was enough. Enough to give me the courage to face Dr. Harrison, enough to risk everything for the chance at justice. Enough to hope that maybe, somehow, something good could come from all this tragedy and violence. "Now," Alessandro said, his voice becoming businesslike again, "let's figure out how to catch a killer." I responded to Dr. Harrison's text message an hour later, agreeing to meet him at the hospital but suggesting we meet in the cafeteria rather than his office. The cafeteria would be public, full of people, safer than an isolated room where no one would hear if something went wrong. His response came back quickly. "Actually, I think it would be better if we could speak privately. Could you meet me in the parking garage instead? Level B2 near the emergency exit. 3 p.m. I showed the message to Alessandro, watching his expression darken as he read it. "He wants to meet in the parking garage. That's not good." "Why not?" "Because parking garages are isolated, full of blind spots, easy to control access in and out. If he's planning to hurt you, that's exactly where he'd want to do it. So I tell him no, suggest somewhere else. That might make him suspicious, make him realize you know more than you're letting on. We need him to feel confident in control, so he'll be willing to talk. Then what do?" Alessandro pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in rapid Italian to whoever answered. The conversation was brief but intense, and when he hung up, he looked grimmer than before. "I'm going to have people in position throughout that parking garage before you arrive. They'll be watching every exit, every stairwell, every elevator. Harrison won't be able to move without us knowing about it. Your people? People I trust. People who understand what's at stake." I didn't ask for more details. Part of me didn't want to know exactly what kind of people Alessandro could call on for help, what kind of resources were available to him in situations like this. "How will you hear what we're saying?" Alessandro reached into a drawer and pulled out what looked like a small button. "Wireless microphone. You'll wear this, and I'll be able to hear every word through an earpiece. And if things go wrong? Then they'll go wrong very quickly for Dr. Harrison." The simple statement sent a chill down my spine, but it was also oddly comforting. Knowing that Alessandro would be listening, that he would be close enough to intervene if necessary, made the thought of facing Dr. Harrison less terrifying. What should I try to get him to say? Get him to admit he was with Isabella that night. Get him to tell you what happened to her, where her body is. But Elena, don't push too hard. If he realizes you're recording him or trying to trap him, he might panic. And panicked killers are dangerous killers. Exactly. I looked at the small microphone in my palm, thinking about how much my life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, my biggest worry had been stretching our grocery budget to the end of the month. Now I was preparing to confront a murderer while wearing a wire for the Mafia. Alessandro? Yes? If something happens to me today, if Harrison. If I don't make it out of there, ... double quotes, Elena, don't talk like that. Just listen. If something happens to me, promise me you'll make sure Sophia is okay. Not just financially, but make sure she knows she was loved, but I didn't abandon her by choice. Alessandro cupped my face in his hands, his dark eyes intense and serious. Nothing is going to happen to you. I won't let it. You can't control everything. I can control this. I can make sure you're safe. Promise me about Sophia. I promise. But I'm also promising that it won't be necessary. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in his confidence and his ability to protect me. But I also knew that we were dealing with someone who had successfully covered up a murder for 5 years, someone who was smart and careful and desperate. "It's time to go," Alessandro said, glancing at his watch. "I want my people in position well before you arrive." I nodded, suddenly nervous about what we were about to attempt. The theory was sound, get doctor. Harrison talking, record his confession, use the evidence to bring him to justice through legal channels. But theories had a way of falling apart when they met reality. Elena? Yes? Be careful, be smart. And remember, the moment you feel unsafe, you get out. Don't try to be a hero. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to get justice for a 16-year-old girl who deserves so much better than what happened to her. She would have liked you, Alessandra said softly. Isabella would have liked your strength, your courage, your determination to do what's right even when it's dangerous. I hope so. I know so. He attached the small microphone to the inside of my jacket, testing the connection on his earpiece to make sure the audio was clear. The technology was more sophisticated than I'd expected. The kind of equipment that suggested Alessandra's organization had access to resources I couldn't begin to imagine. Can you hear me clearly? I whispered. Perfectly. Just remember to keep your jacket on during the entire conversation. Got it. And Elena, I'll be close. Closer than you know. If you need help, if you need me to intervene, just say the word Isabella and I'll be there in seconds. The use of his sister's name as a code word was fitting somehow, a way of making sure she was present for her own justice even though she couldn't be there in person. I'm ready, I said, though I wasn't sure I'd ever really be ready for something like this. Remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you feel. And you're not alone. His words stayed with me as I drove toward Boston General. As I navigated the familiar streets that had become the backdrop for a nightmare I never could have imagined. In just a few hours, I would either have justice for Isabella Toretti or I would be dead. But either way, the truth would finally come to light. The parking garage at Boston General was exactly as intimidating as Alessandra had suggested. Level B2 was mostly empty in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, with long shadows created by the fluorescent lighting and too many blind spots between the concrete pillars. I parked near the emergency exit as Dr. Harrison had requested, noting that my car was one of only a handful on this level. The isolation was unnerving, but I tried to take comfort in knowing that Alessandra's people were somewhere nearby. Watching and listening, Dr. Harrison's car was already there, a silver Mercedes parked about 20 feet from the emergency exit. I could see him sitting behind the wheel, watching me in his rearview mirror as I got out of my car and walked toward the designated meeting spot. He emerged from his vehicle as I approached, looking every inch the respected physician in his expensive casual clothes and confident posture. But now that I knew what he was capable of, I could see something else underneath the professional facade, something cold and calculating that made my skin crawl. Elena, he said, his voice warm and friendly. Thank you for meeting me. I know the situation has been difficult for you. Dr. Harrison, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. You said you had concerns about my safety? I do, and I want you to know that I'm here as a friend, as someone who cares about your well-being and wants to make sure you don't get hurt. He gestured toward a bench near the emergency exit, a spot that was relatively isolated but still within the range of the building's security cameras. I followed him, noting how he positioned himself between me and the most direct route back to my car. Elena, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, about your sudden interest in the hospital's lost and found records. And I'm concerned that someone might be taking advantage of your kindness, asking you to look into things that could put you in danger. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do. His tone remained friendly, but there was something underneath it now, something that reminded me of the way he'd spoken in the security office. I think someone has approached you about a missing person case. Someone who might not have told you the whole truth about who they are or what they're really after. Dr. Harrison, I don't know what you're talking about. Elena, I know about the man who was brought in with a gunshot wound a few nights ago. I know about the ring that went missing from his personal effects. And I know that you've been asking questions about lost property that might be connected to his case. My heart started racing, but I tried to keep my expression innocent and confused. A ring went missing from a patient's belongings? That's terrible. We should report it to security. The ring didn't go missing, Elena. You took it. You took it because he asked you to. Because he convinced you it was connected to some tragic story about his missing sister. The directness of his accusation caught me off guard. I'd expected him to be more subtle, more careful about revealing how much he knew. I don't know what you're talking about, I repeated, but I could hear the lack of conviction in my own voice. Elena, I'm trying to help you here. I'm trying to save you from making a mistake that could destroy your life and put your daughter in danger. The mention of Sophia sent ice through my veins. How did you know about her? How much he'd been watching me, investigating me. My daughter has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this. Because the man who asked you to help him, the man who convinced you to steal that ring and look through confidential records, is Alessandro Toretti. And Alessandro Toretti is not someone you want in your life or anywhere near your child. I forced myself to look surprised, shocked. Toretti? You mean the crime family? Exactly. Elena, you've been helping one of Boston's most dangerous criminals, and I'm afraid you don't understand what that means for your safety. But he seemed. He was just a patient. He was hurt. He needed help. That's how men like Alessandra Toretti operate. They find vulnerable people with financial problems or family responsibilities, and they manipulate them into helping with illegal activities. Dr. Harrison leaned forward on the bench, his expression sincere and concerned. If I hadn't seen the security footage, if I didn't know what he was really capable of, I might have believed he was genuinely trying to help me. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Alessandro Toretti ask you to look into any specific missing person case? Did he mention a sister named Isabella? This was it. This was the opening I needed to get him talking about what had happened 5 years ago. He said something about his sister disappearing. He thought the ring might be connected to her somehow. And what did you find when you looked into it? Nothing really. Just that a ring had been turned into lost and found a few years ago. But Dr. Harrison, if his sister is really missing, shouldn't we try to help find her? Elena, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to get you in trouble. Alessandro Toretti's sister isn't missing. She's dead. And she's dead because she got involved with people she should have stayed away from. My breath caught in my throat. He was admitting it just like that. After 5 years of covering it up, of letting Alessandra search in vain, he was actually admitting that Isabella was dead. Dead? How do you know that? Because I was here the night she died. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning and implication. I tried to keep my expression neutral, tried not to let him see how significant his admission was. You were working that night? I was here, yes. And I tried to help her, Elena. I tried to save her, but it was too late. What happened? Dr. Harrison was quiet for a moment, staring off into the distance as if he was seeing something I couldn't. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost sad. Isabella Toretti was a beautiful girl, but she was troubled. She'd gotten involved with drugs, with people who didn't have her best interests at heart. The night she came to the hospital, she was high, paranoid, talking about conspiracies and people trying to hurt her. But if she was a patient, if she needed help, she wasn't a patient, Elena. She never got officially admitted. She came in through the emergency entrance, ranting and incoherent, making wild accusations about hospital staff being involved in some kind of cover-up. I felt a chill run down my spine. Isabella hadn't been paranoid or delusional. She'd been trying to expose something, trying to get help, and instead she'd walked right into the hands of the person she was trying to expose. What kind of accusations? It doesn't matter. The point is, she was clearly having some kind of psychotic episode, probably drug-induced. I tried to help her, tried to get her to calm down so we could treat her properly. But something went wrong? She became violent. Started attacking me, screaming about how I was part of some conspiracy to hurt young girls. I was trying to restrain her, trying to keep her from hurting herself or others, and she ... She hit her head on the bathroom sink. The lie came so easily, so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. If I hadn't seen the security footage, if I didn't know how calculated and deliberate his actions had been, his story would have sounded plausible. She hit her head? It was an accident, Elena, a terrible, tragic accident. But by the time I realized how badly she was hurt, it was too late. She was already gone. Why didn't you report it? Why didn't you call for help? Doctor. Harrison sighed deeply, his expression filled with what looked like genuine remorse. Because I panicked. Because I knew how it would look, a respected physician alone with a young girl who ends up dead. Because I knew Alessandro Toretti would never believe it was an accident, would never stop hunting for someone to blame. So you covered it up. I made a mistake. A horrible, cowardly mistake that I've regretted every day for the past 5 years. But, Elena, you have to understand, if Alessandro finds out I was involved, if he learns what really happened that night, he'll kill me. And he'll kill anyone who helped him find that information. The threat was subtle but clear. Dr. Harrison was letting me know that helping Alessandro put me in danger, that the safest thing for me to do was to walk away and pretend this conversation never happened. But if it was really an accident, if you were just trying to help her, do you think that matters to someone like Alessandro Toretti? Do you think he cares about truth or justice or due process? He cares about revenge, Elena, cold, brutal revenge against anyone he believes is responsible for his sister's death. What did you do with her body? The question slipped out before I could stop myself, more direct than I'd intended to be. Dr. Harrison's eyes sharpened, studying my face with new intensity. Why would you ask that? If she died at the hospital, there would be records, wouldn't there? A death certificate, an autopsy? Elena, I'm starting to think you know more about this situation than you're letting on. My heart started racing as I realized I'd pushed too hard, revealed too much interest in details that an innocent person wouldn't think to ask about. I'm just trying to understand. If this girl died here 5 years ago, how could it have been covered up so completely? Because I made sure it was covered up completely. Because I had help from people who understood that sometimes tragic accidents need to be handled quietly to prevent even greater tragedies. What kind of help? Dr. Harrison stood up from the bench, and suddenly the friendly, concerned facade was completely gone. The man looking down at me now was cold, calculating, and dangerous. Elena, I think you've been recording this conversation. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I tried to look shocked, confused, but I could see in his eyes that he'd made up his mind. Recording? Dr. Harrison, why would I record our conversation? Because Alessandro Toretti is listening right now, isn't he? Because this whole meeting was a setup to get me to confess to something I didn't do. I don't know what you're talking about. Stand up? What? Stand up. I want to check you for recording devices. This was it. This was the moment when things were going to go very wrong very quickly. I thought about Alessandro's instructions, about how I was supposed to get out if I felt unsafe, but Dr. Harrison was between me and my car, between me and any escape route. Dr. Harrison, you're scaring me. Good, you should be scared. Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into? Do you have any idea what Alessandro Toretti will do to you when he's done using you to get to me? I'm not working with anyone. I'm just trying to understand ... You're lying. His voice was calm, matter of fact. And lying to me is a very dangerous mistake. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. A syringe filled with clear liquid that could have been anything from sedative to poison. This is propofol, Elena. In the right dose, it's a perfectly safe anesthetic. In the wrong dose, it's lethal. And you're about to receive the wrong dose unless you start telling me the truth. I could feel panic rising in my chest, making it hard to breathe. This was exactly what Alessandro had warned me about, exactly why he'd said this plan was too dangerous. Please, Dr. Harrison, I have a daughter. She needs me. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to help her. Kill or hunt down an innocent man. You're not innocent. You killed Isabella Toretti. The words were out before I could stop them, my fear and anger overriding my caution. Dr. Harrison smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. There we go. Finally, some honesty. He stepped closer, the syringe held ready. Yes, Elena, I killed Isabella Toretti. But not the way I told you. Not accidentally. Why? What did she do to you? She saw something she shouldn't have seen, just like you have. What did she see? She saw me disposing of medical waste in a way that certain government agencies would find very interesting. She saw me taking payments from people who needed untraceable medical care. She saw me helping certain criminal organizations clean up problems that required a doctor's expertise. The confession was everything Alessandro had hoped for, everything we needed to prove Dr. Harrison's guilt. But it was also likely to be the last thing I ever heard. So you killed her to keep her quiet. I killed her because she threatened to expose me. Just like you're threatening to expose me now. Dr. Harrison, please? I won't tell anyone what you've told me. I'll take Sophia and we'll leave Boston, disappear somewhere you'll never have to worry about us again. Elena, you're wearing a wire. Alessandro Toretti has heard every word of this conversation. Even if I wanted to let you go, which I don't, it's too late for that now. He was right. Even if he didn't kill me, Alessandro had heard enough to want his own kind of justice. Dr. Harrison was trapped, and trapped animals were the most dangerous kind. Where is Isabella's body? Why? So Alessandro can give her a proper burial? So he can have closure? Dr. Harrison laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Isabella Toretti is fish food at the bottom of Boston Harbor. There's nothing left of her to bury. The casual cruelty of his words, the complete lack of remorse or humanity made me sick. This was a man who had killed a 16-year-old girl and disposed of her like garbage, who had spent 5 years watching her brother search desperately for any trace of her. You're a monster. I'm a survivor, Elena, just like you should have been. He stepped forward with the syringe, and I knew I was out of time for subtlety or careful planning. If Alessandro was going to help me, it had to be now. Isabella, I said loudly. Isabella would have wanted better for her brother. The code word was barely out of my mouth when everything exploded into chaos. The emergency exit door burst open and Alessandro appeared, moving with deadly grace toward Dr. Harrison. At the same time, 2 other men emerged from behind concrete pillars, cutting off any escape routes. Dr. Harrison spun toward the new threats, the syringe still in his hand. For a moment, he looked like he might try to use it on himself rather than face what Alessandro had planned for him. But Alessandro was faster, grabbing his wrist and twisting until the syringe clattered to the concrete floor. You killed my sister, Alessandro said, his voice deadly quiet. You threw her away like garbage and let me search for 5 years. It was business, Dr. Harrison gasped, his face pale with fear. Nothing personal. Everything about this is personal. I watched, frozen with shock and relief, as Alessandro's men secured Dr. Harrison with professional efficiency. In a matter of seconds, he was restrained and helpless, the tables completely turned from just moments before. Elena, Alessandro said, turning to me with concern in his dark eyes. Are you hurt? No, scared but not hurt. You did perfectly. You got everything we needed. What happens now? Alessandro looked at Dr. Harrison, who was now pleading for his life with the same voice he'd used to threaten mine just minutes earlier. Now Dr. Harrison is going to tell us exactly where Isabella is buried, and then he's going to face justice for what he did. What kind of justice? The permanent kind. I thought about protesting, about arguing for legal channels and due process. But then I thought about Isabella, about 16-year-old girl who had died trying to expose corruption, whose body had been thrown into the harbor like she was nothing. Make sure he tells you where she is first, I said quietly. Alessandro nodded, understanding that I wasn't going to argue about his methods anymore. Some people, I was learning, really could only be stopped by force. Elena, you should go home now. Go to Sofia, pack whatever you need, and be ready to leave Boston tonight. Tonight? Tonight? Dr. Harrison might have had partners, people who will want revenge for what happened here. I'm not taking any chances with your safety or Sophia's. I nodded, understanding that this was the price of justice, leaving everything we'd built in Boston, starting over somewhere new. It was a high price, but it was better than the alternative. Alessandro, yes? Thank you. For protecting me, for letting me help get justice for Isabella. Thank you for giving me hope that there might be something good in my future instead of just revenge. I wanted to say more. Wanted to tell him that the something good could include us, could include a future where he learned to smile again, and I learned to trust someone else to help carry my burdens. But this wasn't the time or place for those conversations. Find her, I said instead. Bring Isabella home. I will. I walked back to my car on unsteady legs, leaving Alessandro and his men to handle Dr. Harrison in whatever way they saw fit. The recording device had captured everything we needed to prove his guilt, to show the world what kind of monster had been hiding behind a respected physician's facade. But more importantly, it had given Alessandro the closure he'd been searching for, the answers he needed to finally lay his sister to rest. As I drove away from the hospital for what I knew would be the last time, I thought about Isabella Toretti, about a brave 16-year-old girl who had tried to do the right thing and paid with her life. She'd been gone for 5 years, but today, finally, she was going home. And somehow, despite everything we'd been through, despite all the violence and fear and uncertainty, I felt like I might be going home too. Not to a place, but to a future where Sophia and I could be truly safe, truly protected, truly loved. Alessandro had promised to try to build the kind of life Isabella would have wanted for him. And maybe, if we were both brave enough, he wouldn't have to build it alone. 3 months later, Sophia and I were living in a small coastal town in Maine. where the air smelled like salt and pine trees and the pace of life moved slow enough that we could actually enjoy it. Alessandro had been true to his word about providing for us. We had a comfortable house near the water. Sophia was enrolled in an excellent school, and I had a job at a community health clinic that felt more like a calling than work. Alessandro visited every few weeks, sometimes staying for days at a time, becoming a steady presence in our lives. Sophia adored him, and he was incredibly patient with her endless questions and demands for piggyback rides. Watching them together, I could see glimpses of the man Isabella had believed her brother could become: gentle, protective, genuinely happy. Dr. Harrison's body had been found in Boston Harbor 2 days after our confrontation, an apparent suicide according to the police report. But not before Alessandro had gotten the information he needed about Isabella's location. She'd been found and given a proper burial in a small cemetery overlooking the city she'd loved, with a headstone that read, "Beloved sister and friend, home at last." Alessandro still carried guilt and grief, probably always would. But he was learning to carry hope too, learning to believe in the possibility of happiness instead of just revenge. We were taking things slowly, building trust and affection day by day, creating something neither of us had expected to find. On a warm evening in late August, as Sophia played on the beach in front of our house and Alessandro and I sat on the porch watching her, he reached over and took my hand. "Elena? Yes? I think Isabella would have liked this. The way we're living now, the peace we found. I think so too. And I think she would have liked you. Your courage, your strength, the way you protect the people you love. I wish I could have met her. In a way, you did. Everything good that's happened since that night in the hospital. Everything we've built together, she made that possible by bringing us together." I squeezed his hand, watching Sophia chase seagulls along the water's edge and feeling more content than I had ever thought possible. "Alessandro? Yes? Do you remember how to smile yet?" He turned to look at me, his dark eyes soft with an emotion that had taken months to develop but was now steady and sure. "I'm remembering," he said, and proved it with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Every day with you and Sophia, I remember a little more, and as the sun set over the Maine coast, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I knew that Isabella Toretti was finally at peace. Her brother had found justice for her death, but more importantly, he had found a reason to live again. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when the light hit his face just right, I could see him remembering not just how to smile, but how to hope. The ring that had started everything was gone now, returned to Isabella's grave where it belonged. But the love it had helped create, the family it had brought together, the healing it had made possible, those things would last forever. And in the end, maybe that was the greatest justice of all.